Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome today. So, our session, we're going to be talking about the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project. So, I'm Michelle Johnson. I'm a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service. We have a New York City urban field station located out in Bayside, Queens. And I'm joined by my colleague, John Sucuoğlu, and he's the director of the Spatial Analysis and Visualization Initiative at Pratt Institute. And so what we're going to do today is first, I'm just going to give you an overview and introduction to the data set. Then we're going to talk about a new opportunity we're developing to how to keep the data set live. And we'll demo that. You'll get a chance to check it out on your phone or on your laptop. I've talked about Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project. And what is this word stewardship? Why are we studying it? So at the New York City Urban Field Station, we're a group of researchers and land managers that are interested in best managing green spaces in the city. And so we're interested in understanding not just how government agencies like New York City Parks are taking care of green space in the city, but how are civic actors, so individuals and groups, how are they forming together and taking care of the local environment? And there's a few different ways we think about stewardship in terms of actions or functions. And so that's management, like getting out there and doing a street tree planting or coming in and adding mulch to gardens in a park. Also conservation, so helping conserve pieces of land. Monitoring, going out and doing water quality assessments or doing bio blitzes. Transformation, thinking about waste systems, sustainability of city system advocacy, going out and marching and protesting on City Hall or in the streets. And then education, like environmental education. So all of these are different forms of stewardship that we're interested in researching and understanding and representing. And so from our work, I've been talking so far about taking care of the environment, but these stewardship practices also affect social systems. And so our research, my work with social scientists, Erica Svensson and Lindsay Campbell, and we've seen that stewardship can build and strengthen communities, provide a means to contribute to a purpose, catalyze change in communities, serve as a form of empowerment, and play a key role in helping communities recover from disturbances and disasters. And so that takes us to our data set, the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project. And so what this is, it starts off as a survey that's sent out to different civic groups. So that can be nonprofits, but also informal community groups. And it asks questions of those groups, how, where, and why these groups are working and caring for the local environment. And it started here in New York City, did the first data collection in 2007, a second data collection in 2017, and we've been expanding to work with partners in more than 15 locations in the US and worldwide. So in terms of methods, I'm just gonna introduce a little bit about what is on the survey, what kind of questions are asked and collected. So first, we are wanting to understand something about the groups themselves. How many staff do you have? Do you have no staff? How many volunteers? What year were you founded? What is your purpose? How much budget do you have on the places you work? Who owns the land? And then we ask questions to map geographies. Where are these groups working? And we call those territories or turfs. We also ask questions to look at what kinds of sites within that boundary are you stewarding. So if we're thinking Roosevelt Island is an area that is a turf, somebody might be just taking care of the street trees here, or they might also be taking care of all the public spaces, all the parks, also the water edge, and then networks. But the last part of this data set is social network data that we can display. We ask groups questions, who do you work with? Who do you collaborate with? And from those answers, we can actually map networks of connections and look at a broader stewardship network in the city. So the way we collect the data is we first have to build this list of groups. Who are we going to send the survey to? That's the real question. It's not like all of these groups we have an existing list that we can send them to. We have to go out and figure out where are these groups all across the city. With nonprofits, we can start off with some IRS data and say, okay, here's nonprofits. We think they might work to take care of the local environment, but maybe these other groups that don't say they do environmental work, maybe they're also stewards. So we want to be a little more inclusive. And then for community group, they're not represented in one great big directory somewhere. So we're the ones creating a directory like that. Then we send out the survey. We're able to create these geographic and network data, and then display those results on interactive maps, dashboards, etc. So I'm going to show some of the outcomes and outputs from engaging in this kind of mapping. And what we can start to learn is who is participating in stewardship, how are they participating, where in space, where within the city are they participating, and what is the effect these groups are having on the local environment and also on the social fabric. And so from that, we can apply the data to help enable collaboration and coordination, looking at where there are strengths in a particular neighborhood or with certain kinds of connections, or where there are gaps, maybe where more effort needs to be emphasized in a certain area. And then we can also, we've collected data here in 2007 and 2017, we can start looking at change over time of these groups and also their relationship with the environment. So some of those specifics are we can look at organizational capacity of an individual group by looking just at the response from the survey and where they're mapped working in the city. We can also take all of those polygons of turfs and stack them together and say, where in the city are there more groups working or are there fewer groups working? And what's great from the way the groups can self-map themselves, or also from a description, we're able to map things. And we can see that they work at different sites and scales, at the level of a community garden, to a borough, across boroughs, and along corridors like the High Line or along the East River. And we can also look at these data in relationship to other data sets. And we can learn things like that stewards are responding to disturbance. So on the left is a map of stewardship groups and their relationship to where parts of the city are affected by climate change. On the right, where stewardship groups work in relationship to housing affordability. And these maps are part of a larger exhibition that John created called Who Takes Care of New York City? And we'll have a link later so you can take a look at that. Here's the networks, how they look. Just one example of looking at the larger network. You can dig in and unpack smaller parts of this data set as well. Where there are more connections, groups will be more likely to be at the center of the diagram. And so the list on the right is showing who are those most central brokers, who's able to connect information and resources between groups. And so you see, we've got New York City Parks showing up as one of the central brokers, if you will, but also lots of these other civic organizations throughout the city. A couple examples of how these data are applied is working with New York City Parks. They're a partner with us at the New York City Urban Field Station. They've used the data sets when they are engaging in large-scale volunteer programs like Million Trees, New York City, and also as a way to say, hey, I'm about to go out and do work in this particular neighborhood. Are there community organizations I should be reaching out to? Another thing is thinking about climate change. The mayor's office has looked at the StewMap data as a way of thinking about where these groups are as an indicator of social resilience. And so using that in planning and preparing neighborhoods for climate change. So how do we get to the data? So we are not right now on New York City Open Data, but hope to be soon. But we do have the data hosted on our Forest Service website. There's a couple ways to get to it. So I have the links right here. I'll attach all of the slide deck to the schedule. So if you guys are registered, you'll be able to get to these links. You don't have to follow that really long URL there to get. And also a couple things to think about if you just left this conversation and you wanted to find it again and you don't remember anything, just think StewMap and New York City Urban Field Station, and everything will drive you towards these links. So what the data are is we've got that 2007 data set, 2017 data set. We have spatial data, points and polygons. We also have CSV files of just the attributes of the survey responses, also the network data and the data dictionary that explains all the fields. So we also, here's a plug for next Thursday. we're going to do a hackathon where we're inviting anybody. So anybody in the room, if you're interested, you can go to New York City Open Data Week and look at their schedule and sign up. And we're going to do it all virtual. So it'll be starting 7 o'clock next Thursday. And all skill sets, welcome. If you are an amazing coder, wonderful. If you're just starting out, join us. If you like thinking about data architecture or visualization, we'd be happy to have you. And we're going to explore these data sets and think about new ways to visualize, improve the way we're starting to think about collecting data in real time. And so that's where I'm going to start shifting the conversation over to John. And he's been working on this project called StewMap Live with our team. And there's a couple of pinch points in this data collection process. I first talked about that list of groups. How do we keep it up to date? How do we find who these community groups are? We can go and look at that 990 IRS data set, which is updated once a year. But for those groups that aren't nonprofits yet or ever, how would we find them? We're looking for opportunities for crowdsourcing, and that's part of what we're going to talk about and show just in a couple minutes. And there's another pinch point is once groups submit their data, we have been thinking of it like the census, where we've gone out and every 10 years we've done a survey. We're 5 years out from when we collected the data. So at this point in time, there's been a lot of changes with the pandemic, for example. There are likely new groups out there, but also the groups that we have mapped, probably somebody's moved on and the contact person is different now, or maybe they're doing different kinds of work. And we don't have it, represented for today. We have it represented for the time they took the survey. So we've got a really kind of crazy data infrastructure roadmap here. I won't really go into it, but just thinking about those 2 points, how to keep the list of groups overall up to date, and how do we keep up to date the data we're collecting. And so with that, if you guys have your phones or laptops out, I invite you to check out this website right now, and we're going to turn it over to John, and he's going to do a walkthrough demo, and you guys can contribute data in real time today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think try to see the website on your phone. It's not going to work really well because I actually haven't made the mobile version of it yet. I apologize for that. So laptops are. So as Michelle was saying, the data collection process for the live format is going to be, it's a little tricky because we have data coming from different sources. So we might have a database coming from the Forest Service itself or local partners. And then we're going to have data coming from 990 data sets and then coming from StewMap as well. None of them necessarily share a common value. So it has to be shrunken to a version where everything is shared and nothing is empty. And of course, like with public surveys, a lot of answers can be put in that might not be appropriate for it to be shared, especially since the data will be hosted in Forest Services network. We have to be careful about that. So what can be published, what cannot be published. But let me go to this and show you where we are at right now. So please keep in mind that this is a work in progress. Not everything is working perfectly yet, but oh, you have it already. All right, this works as well. Right now, it is a very simple tool, but at least it's functional. Everything is connected to ArcGIS Online database right now. We've combined data sets from 990s and the old StewMap data. And you can see all of the groups here. There's about 4,500 of them. And you can search. Okay, we want to use this site, again, like a work in progress. So hopefully it's going to be better in the future. But on the right-hand side, you can see all the list of the groups that are available in our data set right now. If I remember correctly, there should be about 4,500 of them listed. If you go into detail, you'll see that quite a lot of them right now is duplicated because the records are just complicated. Not all of the names match. Some groups are just registered in the IRS multiple times as well, especially universities with multiple campuses and things. It is not very easy, but I don't know, if you were to search for a group here, so as I know, North Brooklyn neighbors, let's say, they will come up. You can click here and actually see their site. But I intentionally selected because there's 2 of them in the list even. I know them very well. They used to be in 240. Now they're in 110 Kent Avenue, but there's really not a lot of ways to clean this up without going in manually and cleaning all 4,000 or so groups. But the nice thing is that you can suggest edits to this. So, either of the groups, if you were to click on edit, you're going to have the survey 123 form come up on the left side, and you can suggest edits here. They go into our database and then they get reflected onto the map. Right now, immediately, I think in the future, we're going to have to change that immediate connection because we cannot show things that are put in by people right away. Or you can click here to add a new group and you'll have the exact same fields with better explanations very soon, hopefully. And you can input an address, the group name, and you can suggest a new group as well. On the more technical side, if you guys are interested, because at the end, this is going to be again hosted in the Force Services network for security reasons. Everything is hosted in ArcGIS Online. And at the back end of the website, it is using the JavaScript API for Survey 123 and ArcGIS Online on feature layers and web app tools. Anything I'm missing? Let me actually, also, if you know the location of a group, but you don't know what the name is, or if you want to click, you can also click in the groups and the map as well and see a little bit of information here. You can see that their primary focus as well. This is either coming from StuMap or from the 990 description. So some of them are extremely general, especially if it's the activity codes from the past StuMap versions of past 990s. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some are green and some are gray. The green dots are the groups that have taken StuMap already. The gray ones are coming from 990s. So we have a lot more information about the green ones, but they're not shown yet. Actually, we're not, I think, going to show the very detailed information about them. And there are multiple StuMaps for the many different locations, not only New York. Yep.
I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and you do have it in your listing, but it doesn't describe it very well, and it shows it as a point on a map, but the Natural Areas Conservancy, the group that I'm part of, works in all forested and wetland areas
Yeah.
in New York City, and you guys actually work with them
Of course, yeah.
pretty extensively, and you would never be able to tell that from their entry on the StuMap, so it seems like there's a little...
Yeah, that is a problem that we discussed quite a bit as well. Maybe you say first.
Yeah, so when somebody fills out the full survey, they get represented on this. And so we have the full turf of New York City for Natural Areas Conservancy, for example. So it's not what you guys are looking at. We're looking at it with the data testing we have. Where this is a static map of the 2017 data that you're looking at right now. The other one we were looking at with the points we're trying to figure out who would we send the survey to for future iterations. So it's that, when I was showing a step by step, I had 2 circles. This is to solve that problem of who would we send the survey to. And then going back to that roadmap, there were all these different arrows and diagrams, kind of of the database architecture. We also want to do, we're not quite there, is offer people the opportunity to take the survey again and have the data represented on a more dynamic map, where we keep this 2017 map, and now you can say, here's this, archived in time map, but also here's this ongoing updated map, and we're not there yet. That's just the next. But this is so what we're showing today is the starting point with these points of how do we figure out who we send the survey to, and down the line, the next part is to capture in more real time.
So the points are actually the contacts.
Yeah, the office locations, let's say.
Exactly. They're just the contacts.
Exactly.
And even to be able to...
I work for the city and I have to communicate with agents all the time, and having a contact at each agency or is incredibly challenging. Yeah, there's so much
And also, even to get office locations is quite tricky because a lot of these organizations only list PO boxes as addresses. So for them, we take their zip code and get an centroid of the zip code just to be able to represent them on a map. So that's another challenge. But here, what you're seeing is the 2017 data mapped, all, I think, 800 or so groups mapped. And when you map their turfs and office locations on top of each other, it actually becomes quite a complicated, not only map, but also a very complicated tool. you have a lot of things overlapping. And once you click on something, it's trying to show you like 800 different things that you can click through. And you can see that for GS Online is still loading. It's just a lot of data. Maybe if we zoom in a little bit, we'll do better. But for each location, we do create these tools. There's one dashboard and there's one app. Dashboard is even a little slower, but once it comes into view, I'll click on one and show. You can click on office locations, or you can click on office turfs. Not office turfs, sorry, like generally group turfs, to see a lot more data on this. And you can also export the data from here, and you can apply a few filters. It is slow.
I use my computer when it's presenting, and
Uh.
I through the internet, it doesn't like that.
Okay, whenever something shows up, I'll. Okay, so let's try to click on one. As you can see, like let's say if a group says something like in their boundary statements that they work in the community gardens in New York, suddenly their turf becomes very complicated as well, because there's hundreds of them. And someone actually goes in and draws all of them, puts them in a database, but it just makes it quite difficult to, your computer is not happy with this. Okay, so because the resolution is very small, it's opening it in another window. Normally you can see it as a pop-up as well, but for each group, you'll be able to see what are their primary activity, what other things that they do, what is their mission, what is their focus, all of them, or their primary one, they're separated in the stew map, and their primary steward space as well. But in the same location, you can see that there's 60 of them. So this like turf map is hard to navigate. And one of the reasons why we're separating where this exists as this like heavier tool where it can take a lot of time to explore and how the live works is that when you take the full stew map survey, it actually takes quite a while, right? It takes 45 minutes to 15 minutes to take. Really? Okay, 25, good. But this live version, we're hoping that it just takes a few seconds. Just enter like name and address and zip and you're ready to go. So that we collect data here for 10 years or 5 years, whatever the time period in between will be between stew maps. And then we'll just reach out every 10 or so years. Shall we move on to questions?
So we do, as we just showed, we've only shown this demo of StewMap Live. We have other visualization products too. So if we want the conversation to go in that direction, we can pull up even more than what John pulled up and show you guys some other things. But also happy to talk. What we would love to hear about is thoughts about this, like how do you keep data real time? How do we think through that?
How do we get a good understanding of who is out there, other than just looking at IRS records too?
So with that, we'll open the floor. Yes.
Yeah, the question was how frequently the data updated and how is it managed? It's involving spatial data. And so a lot of points.
The underlying data comes from two sources right now, right? One is IRS 990 records, so that gets updated yearly, and I think we'll follow them. The other one is the StewMaps original data set, which is every 10 years. It's not really very often, but we want to call it live because we can suggest edits, and the edits right now are actually updated live. So I think when this is finalized, hopefully we want to put a little bit of lag in there. Just like we'll show the users that it is edited, that it's under review, and the suggestions need to go under review before they get published. Just because.
And also we get kind of requests from folks, hey, our data is out of date. We want to find a way to update it. And so this is a way to allow, like, how do we update things without having to update like the entire data set? And so that this is the approach we're taking. Where as that transition is happening, it's not just
Louder.
as that transition is happening, it's not just us as researchers wanting to keep the data alive. It's also the groups themselves really being interested in that.
You mentioned that the turf areas were manually created. Is there a plan for the StewMap Live to capture those specific boundaries in a more automated way?
Great question. We've been trying to do that for the last year almost. So in the larger StewMap in different locations, not in New York yet, but in newer locations, we have used the Survey 123's turf tools so people can go in and draw their turf, but I have to confess that they're not great. In the survey we got in our data, we have responses like, this tool is not really easy. We were not able to draw. Can you add this to it? It's just like drawing turfs is quite a difficult thing to do, especially not all of our users are very tech savvy, but we are trying. So right now, I think like in Bridgewater, we had maybe 30 or 40% of our groups actually mark a territory. We had to correct them a little bit, but it was quite okay.
And then John's built a process for how do we QA QC what is drawn, and then also for those that aren't drawn or those that need some kind of snapping to existing geographic boundaries, a whole script that goes through and says, here's all the available GIS data layers, rivers, streams, geographic boundaries, whatever. Let's just bring those up so they're easy to access and start doing that snapping.
One of the things that comes to mind with crowdsourcing data is like offering something to users. And I guess I'm curious, like from the surveys you've done, is there feedback to participants in terms of maybe like connecting them or other ways? And how are you thinking about that in a more active?
Yeah, so when we like launched the full version, we did send, hey, everybody, we're gonna have these, everybody, the data's live, right? Anybody that takes the survey, and I should like back up and say, groups opt into being on the map. So some folks take the survey and they say, hey, I want to give you this information, but I don't want you to share it with everybody. And anybody that's on the map has said, I want my data to be there. And part of the reason a lot of groups do want the data to be there is because they want to be seen. They want to be found. They want to be discoverable. And they also want to know who else is out there. And so having the contact information be up to date is really valuable, I think, to groups so that somebody can reach out to them or vice versa. So there is a real benefit, I think, being offered there. And that the feedback we've been getting from folks that have taken the time to fill out the survey is, can you adjust our data? We want to reflect a change we've seen. And the way working with such a large and kind of complex data set with the turfs and the networks is they're all interrelated. So making a small change somewhere has all of these ripple effects that we, like we're researchers that do work with data, but we are not like computer programmers. And so we lack that, a little bit of that. How do we keep everything working? And so that's why we're shifting towards this live approach.
You had a question there.
Yeah, thank you. And it seems like all the groups have different like focus areas as well. I mean, you already have that data. I think it would be really useful to see a filter function where you can filter one thing specialized in. So
It's that one.
Thank you. Yeah, so we do have that built into the existing data set, the static one, so that you can filter by organization type, by the primary focus of the organization. So it might be a youth organization that has community gardens. So we can say, okay, show me all the youth organizations. We can also say, what kind of places are you stewarding? So show me all the community gardens. So we can set up a filter like that very easily with the existing data set. And to become part of the data set, there's kind of two routes of entry. We're really interested from a research perspective in starting with a list that we know, here's who we're reaching, so we can get a response rate. Okay, 10% of known groups have responded, or 50%. We use that to assess bias, and are we representing our sample? Is our sample representative of groups out there? But we also don't want to say, hey, you're not part of that list, you can't take the survey. So we also invite anyone to take the survey. And so basically it's, are you two people or more? Are you a group? And do you do something that helps to take care of the local environment in New York City? And that's basically there's no barrier to entry, an individual can take it. But when we go and look at who's going to make it to the final map, those are the two criteria. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that fully. Okay. Yeah, so we to date have been, let's say, going to folks that we know have requested the data and looking at what are they using the data for. And that's been a way we've been getting some qualitative feedback on what's the impact. Some more what we've observed by showing these sorts of data sets, we partner with New York City Parks. And when the 2007 StewMap data set came out, that shifted the conversation with New York City Parks about it not being all about city park employees have to do the work, but also that let's recognize all the value of who else is contributing. And there's some different ways of thinking about that, but what it has done is led to New York City Parks creating a stewardship team where they're looking to support stewards. And beyond, like there's civic organizations that work closely with parks to help do that as well. But within parks, that's like an outcome that's happened. And so we have these qualitative stories that we've seen over time of how people are using the data. We recently met and said, how would you like to see the data to a number of different users? And so we did a small interview qualitative assessment to say, okay, this is the way we're presenting the data. What would be more useful? And what we heard was right now, this static map one has a lot going on, as John was saying. Seeing it load, it takes a little while to load. We've made all the data accessible, but we haven't offered any interpretation. And that's deliberate. We want somebody to say, here's what the group said, and I want to see it. But now what we're working towards is, can we aggregate some of this data into a stewardship capacity index? And so that's something that there were city agencies and kind of larger civic organizations that said, I want to use these data, but I'm not a GIS person myself. How would I apply the data? I just want like a single metric. And so that's our attempt to take all the complexity of this data and turn it into one value for a neighborhood. And so what we did is we took number of groups per neighborhood. We took the network capacity of that neighborhood. How many connections are there between groups in a neighborhood? And then what's the personnel? What staff size is there in working in a neighborhood? So it could be that a group works citywide. And because of that, there's these groups working citywide. We want to be able to say, hey, they are represented on Roosevelt Island, or they're represented in Bed-Stuy or on Staten Island. They might be citywide, but their capacity is citywide. And then also there are local groups that only work in that neighborhood, and we want to represent them equally. And so that's some choices we made in that index, and we're still, it's one of our new things that isn't quite ready for prime time. I think I can actually bring it up with our remaining minutes. Let's see if it comes up. I was thinking there. And I think this one, we turned it into a story map. This is our way to digest things. And while I pull it up, I'll start taking questions and I'll come back to it.
Right here, thinking, well,
Yeah, so we're using neighborhood tabulation areas. And I said neighborhood just to shorthand. When this is published, it'll have a methodology kind of saying, how did we create everything? How did we make these choices about the index? How did we take other data? So we've taken data sets from NYC Open Data, from other places. And what we're trying to do is put it in conversation with our stewardship data. And so on the left right here is number of groups per neighborhood. It's in blue. And on the right now, it's surface temperature. But we can also shift it to be social vulnerability, number of parks in an NTA, number of community gardens. So places that are not showing up, NTAs means there's not any data for community gardens there. And then you can overlay, this is our approach right now of how do we make the data more accessible from the really complex data set we had before to can we simplify it into a simpler number per NTA. And the way we've collected the data, you could do this for census tract. You could just choose a different like aerial container for the StewMap data to put it in conversation with other data sets. But we chose neighborhood tabulation area because people kind of know what that means. Like, I don't know what my census, block group is. I can't tell you that number. I can't even tell you the boundaries of it, but I roughly know the boundaries of my NTA because it's roughly the boundaries of my name. So that was the rationale for that. Yes. Yeah, it's a great question, and we're actively working on those data right now. We had, 815 groups took the survey for the 2017. We had roughly like 500 in 2007. Not all those groups are the same from those 2 points in time. So between the two, we can look at a cohort of roughly 108 groups. But they were existed in 2007, and they existed in 2017, and they took the survey at both of those points in time. And because that data set is not as large, we're going to do more of a qualitative analysis to look at what's causing those differences. And so some of the things we're seeing is that some groups, there's not a lot of change, at least from the questions on the survey kind of change. And other groups, there is a big change. And so what's causing that? And we have some interview data with some of those groups. So 8 groups out of that 100 we've interviewed. And we've asked questions about change, like what caused shifts in your group and why. And so we're going to also relate those data, but it's work in progress right now. All right, we can wrap up. Just if you want to find these data, I know that the links are crazy. Just remember New York City Stew Map or New York City Urban Field Station. Type it into Google and it'll take you to the Stew Map website, and there'll be like a data maps piece on there. And right now the live piece is not published. You can see it's got a Pratt Savvy link because we're actively developing it. And feel free also to reach out to us. I'll put up our, I was gonna put up our, it's okay. Yeah, I'll just leave it up at the end. Reach out to us by email or our colleagues, Lindsay Campbell and Erica Svensson, if you guys have any feedback or thoughts on a later date. And so I'll load the slide deck into the schedule so you guys can have all these links. You don't need to remember everything either. All right, thanks you guys.
Thank you very much.